Hi, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got a few more folks that are coming in, but we wanted to get started. We said we'd start at noon today, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind, could you give me a thumbs up from the participant chat window, just to make sure that everyone's hearing me okay? That would be wonderful. And just wanted to go over a couple of basic housekeeping rules very quickly before we get started. We do have the chat feature enabled. So if you're having any technical difficulties along the way, whether it be with audio, we will be recording the event today and providing that to you at the end. So you will have that. Also, if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer, either during the webinar or close to the end, we're going to have a Q&A session. Please put those in the chat window. You can either send those to everyone or just to me. My name is Melissa McCrae. I'm with Digitech Interactive. I'm Vice President of Business Development and Sales. Joining me today is Jack McGrath, our President and Creative Director and presenter for today's webinar. The Future is Now. A look at today's modern learner. And I think without any further ado, we're going to hand it over to you, Jack.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we are going to talk about, we're going to be talking a little bit about today, the future of learning. So, you know, it's interesting when you talk about the future of learning. I'm sure a lot of you have probably sat in on sessions like this before in the past, and it's interesting with sort of the use of, you know, augmented reality and virtual reality and holodecks and all of this. Sometimes you can think that, you know, the future of learning is always way in the far off. So, in fact, what we want to argue today in this webinar is talk about the fact that we believe the future is actually here. That there's technologies and approaches that we can all use to improve. In our case, we're going to be talking about onboarding. So to do that, we'll talk a little bit about Digitech, and then we're going to talk about the traditional onboarding process, you know, to talk about what the process typically is. And then we're going to do a little bit of an alternative reality thing, and we're going to go back and do a redo in time, and we are going to look at Gina Futuro, who is going to be onboarding to a new company. And then we're going to revise that story, her story, and we're going to talk about how onboarding can be today. So I just had a quick question, and if you can maybe answer in chat. Would there be, how many of you are having a little bit of trouble finding employees right now? You can give me a little thumbs up, or in this case, it might be a thumbs down if that's the case. So are any of you having trouble employees in getting them onboarded? So I'm seeing a few people have indicated they are. Yep. I mean, with sort of this historic low in unemployment, I think it's been a struggle for a lot of business owners and a lot of organizations to find new hires. So, you know, what we want to talk about today is how can we retain them? Because the worst thing that can happen is in this really tight job market, when we actually find the ideal candidate, you know, to actually onboard them incorrectly so that they leave. So we want to figure out how can we help to retain those talented people that we find. So we'll talk about that. We'll summarize and then we'll wrap up for QA. Also, by the way, we're going to be also asking a couple of questions along the way. So if you have questions, feel free. Melissa will be monitoring the chat. And we'll try to get those as soon as we can. Worst case, we'll definitely cover them at the end. So we want to find out a little bit about how things are going. So that's what we'll be doing. So let's go ahead and just kind of move along. Got it. So now we've got a poll I wanted to ask, just before we get started, we wanted to ask a quick poll to get a sense of the audience here is, how do you onboard your new new hires right now, and I'm going to just kind of like launch this poll.
And we'll give about for this to get your responses. That way we'll have a good display of what you all have as far as feedback for our first poll. All right, we'll be closing this poll. So let's take a look here and see where we've landed.
Got it, okay, we're going to share the results here. So it looks like many of you are doing a blended approach. It looks like about 57% of you are doing that. Some classroom training, some on-the-job training, some e-learning. So obviously you can choose more than one. What I'm really happy to see is that none of you are saying no onboarding program. So off the bat, you're doing better than a lot of organizations. In fact, according to a recent Burson by Deloitte poll, they indicated that 50% of organizations either don't have an onboarding program or they have an onboarding program that's very, very informal. So pat yourselves on the back. You're providing some onboarding, and that's great. So I'm going to close that poll, kind of move that over for a second. Now we're going to move on to a second poll. I'd love to find out basically how are your polls being, how basically are what's the feedback that you're getting on your polls? And we're just going to do that right now. Got it. Okay, so if we could take about 30 seconds or so, we'd love to see what the feedback is on the onboarding that you're doing right now. And definitely you can feel free to choose as many as you need to on this one. Like we've got somebody saying the onboarding was great. That's awesome.
That's what you want to hear.
That's exactly what you want to hear. So I'm going to be passing this presentation off to whoever answered that as my onboarding is great. And by the way, we want to keep this a very collaborative session. So ideas are going to be awesome. If you've got any comments you want to make, please feel free to share those in the chat. That would be great. Okay, I think we can probably end the poll there. I'm going to share the results. So it's looking like there's a majority, about 56% or so, that's saying that there's too much content in your onboarding. Equally high, there's not enough hands-on practice. Got it. Okay. A few of you already know this information. So, okay, well, that's good. And again, we've got that outlier. There's somebody onboarding is great. And so I want to talk to that person and get some insights on that. So let's go ahead and move forward to talk a little bit about some of the statistics. Let's just start. I always think it's a good idea to kind of take a look at what the problem is. So I don't know if anyone had any other feedback that you get, but 86% of respondents, and this is based on a SHRM. Some of you may be familiar with the Society of Human Resource Management, a really great organization. So they did a study in 2009. 86% of respondents decided to stay long-term with a company after their first 6 months or within that first 6 months of employment. So I think that's really important. And I think it's something that we all know. I don't know if any of you have read the book by Malcolm Gladwell, the Blink concept. People make judgments very, very quickly. And I think the first impression that you can make in your organization to a new hire really can have some lasting results. In fact, another part of that same study, 69% were more likely to stay with a company for up to 3 years or more when that organization had an onboarding program. So again, it looks like all of you, according to the poll so far, have some sort of an onboarding program. So that's awesome. And by the way, we're going to be sharing at the end of this webinar, we'll be sharing the recording to you all, so you can always refer back to this. And our citations will be giving you the research for that, where we came up with that. So again, several people are saying that they'd be staying more likely, and I think that goes down. I think that aligns with the concept of a good onboarding training program. So having said that, let's take a look a little bit, because I mean, what's interesting too is with these stats and the surveys. I think a lot of you may be familiar with the Gallup. It's kind of an infamous Gallup poll done in 2015 about employee engagement. And Gallup actually found that 50% of your employees are not engaged in your company. So that's kind of scary. And I've heard this many, many times. People bring this survey up a lot. So I think one thing to be aware of is that we not only want to keep our employees for, 3 years or longer, but we also want to keep them engaged. And we believe that a really good onboarding program can create a culture of engagement that will continue on. So we're going to share some ideas on that today. Got it. So a little bit about Digitech before we get started. We actually, as a company, started in 1988. So this is in fact, it's almost like right now is our 30-year anniversary. We're really proud of that. And since 2000, we've been focused on transforming learning to change lives. It's really what we're all around about. And what we believe that is, the vision for Digitech is that we provide what I need to know, when I need to know it, delivered in a surprising way that produces results. So I think what you're going to see in some of the ideas that we're going to present today on an onboard program for the future, for now, will reflect some of these, what I need to know, when I need to know it. And I noticed in your polls, some of you had mentioned that there wasn't enough connection back to my job. I didn't know how it related back to my job. So we'll have some ideas on that. And again, this is going to be a session where I think we're going to provide a lot of practical ideas. So I'm really hoping that you'll bring something back. Again, a little bit about Digitech in terms of who we are. So we've worked since 2000 on learning and development, and we focused on that area. And we've been, fortunate enough to work with, some of the world's most, successful organizations. And for many of these organizations, we've created onboarding for them. So what we've done over those years is I think we've learned a lot about best practices, what works really, really well, what doesn't work very, very well. So we'll share all of that. And we've been fortunate enough to earn some awards along the way for some of those projects as well. But again, this is all about learning what works for you. Awards are nice, but what really matters is, can we make a difference, and can we help to onboard people that will keep them engaged and retained. In addition, our learning technology that we've evolved, starting in 2003, we started looking at some of the struggles and some of the problems in learning and development that you were facing, and we developed Knowledge Direct, a learning management platform that helps to provide some of these ideas. And today we'll show you some examples from Knowledge Direct, but again, we're going to have some other examples too. This is not a promotional webinar. This is really about sort of ideas. So, but I can't help but to put a little kudo out to the Digitechies for, we just won last month, we just learned that we won a Brandon Hall Award for the learning management platform. So we're very, very thrilled about that. So let's get started here a little bit. What I'd like to do is to make this really applied, and we're really about applied learning, I'd like you to think a little bit about your organization. So for our example, we're going to be using Gina Futuro, who's starting with a brand new organization. But I want to know who your Gina is. Who is the person that's coming into your organization that you're going to hire? And then I'd like you to think about some of the things that we're going to be talking about along the way, and talk about how can I transform my learning and my onboarding by applying some of these ideas. And we would absolutely love to get some feedback from you on how you might actually, execute some of these ideas. So we'll be asking for that along the way. So again, we'd love it at the end is if you can bring something solid and concrete back from this webinar that you can apply, then that will be a huge win for us. So let's meet Gina. So Gina Futuro, a little about Gina. She is actually an account executive. She has some experience in sales and software sales, incidentally. And she just found out that she got an account management position with Skynet. Now, Skynet is not related at all with Skynet, so we're not worried about robots. But I thought it was kind of an interesting concept. Instead of Skynet, it's Skynet. And Gina is excited about working for Skynet. And she is not a cyborg. She's an actual human being. So she's excited. I think we've all remembered, when we got that job offer, remember the excitement you felt when you got the offer letter and you showed up on that very first day and you're meeting everybody and everything is exciting and you start out wanting to be the best Gina Futuro you can possibly be for Skynet. And then week one starts. So Skynet is a software company. They offer software solutions. And so like a lot of technology companies, when they onboarded, Gina has been offered up some training for her onboarding. So in this case, Gina is basically been assigned 34 sales courses. Now, as I mentioned, Gina is an account manager. She has experience. Nonetheless, she's been assigned 34 sales courses for her onboarding training. So, and I think we saw some of this in the poll earlier. Many of you had mentioned that there's a problem with your onboarding, that there's too much initial training. And we are hearing that too from a lot of the organizations that we work with. We're constantly struggling with too much initial training. And often, and I don't know if you ever run into this, but often one department doesn't know what the other department's doing. And so there's a lot of redundancy. There could be some contradictions in the training. Often it's not tailored. So you're basically opened up to a huge catalog of available courses. You don't know which ones you're supposed to take. And they're not contextual. This is week one. So for sales training, I'm getting everything all at once. And it's not presented in context to anything. So as a result, basically, for Gina, she's looking down at this and saying, I got to do what? And she gets to click next to continue through an awful lot of training. So I gotta put out a shout out to a great inspiration of mine. His name is Mike Kunkel, who is a sales training expert who has spoken at a lot of ATD functions. I don't know if some of you know Mike Kunkel. He's a genius in my opinion. But he actually presented this at one of the sessions I sat in. So some of these ideas I'm going to present today, I give homage to Mike Kunkel on these. But this was one of the cartoons he kind of, and I don't know, how many of you can relate to this? In new hire training, everybody's just pummeled with how many different things can we push? So this is what Gina is facing on week one. So here we are in week one. We've got these 34 courses. By week 3, Gina has finally made it through all of those assigned courses. So she's been onboarded. Now, in your case, it might be instructor-led training. I think it all is the same, though. And oftentimes we're hearing that, this is not just a situation that's online learning. There's a lot of sort of redundant or too much information with instructor-led as well. So how many of you, show of hands, I don't know if anybody wants to give us a thumbs up, about how many of you are familiar with Ebbinghaus? Taking a look. I'm seeing some of you are, yep, some of you are indicating you are. Got it. So Ebbinghaus is a researcher. What's really interesting is he came out of the 1850s, believe it or not. Social science concept is that when people learn something, and this is just as true back in 1850 as it is today, when they learn, the mind basically holds 100% retention of the content on day 0. So when you learn it, you know it, you remember it. So for Gina, for those 34 courses, when she learned those, she remembered them. But you'll notice this curve, I think, here. Now, the curve is indicating that after 1 day, 2 days, you can see this actual inverse curve that we're getting. So that by day 6, the 6th day after training, you've remembered almost nothing of what you originally got. So Ebbinghouse's concept is that unless you're boosted with that content, unless you're using it or being reminded about that content, you're going to constantly learn it. So what's ironic is that Gina is going to forget the vast majority of what she learned during onboarding. Unfortunately, though, she will remember some of the content that was out of date. She happens to remember this impressive stat about SkyNot, 83%. So that's stuck in her brain. The problem is that that stat was delivered in an e-learning that hadn't been updated in a year and a half, and it was completely outdated. So unfortunately, the little bit that Gina did remember is bad content. So that's a real struggle. So again, it's a problem. So we're at week 3. Let's see what happens by the time we get to week 8. So by week 8, again, the majority of what Gina has learned, she's forgotten, but she does have her first sales demo. So this is a huge thing. She gets her first sale. Now, the problem is during the demo stage, she used that incredible 83% stat. Well, I think a lot of you are probably familiar with this concept that the vast majority of people, in fact, there was a recent Forbes article that said that 50% of buyers actually research your company way before they contact a salesperson. So what's really scary, I think, is that most of in sales anyway, our prospects know more about our products and our company than our sales team does. So they've been doing all of their research. So when Gina actually was presenting during this demo and used that stat, well, immediately the prospect knew that that was not a good stat, that was actually not true. Gina lost complete credibility and she lost the sale. So that was a problem. So again, by week 12, not too unexpected, we have Gina, who's now her leads and her prospecting and her demos have all gone downhill. The CRM is showing that she's just not performing well as a salesperson. So what do we all do when somebody's not performing? What's the answer? The answer is always more training. So Gina, even though she's trained as an account manager, and even though she's sat through 34 sales training courses, now she's got to be sent. She's going to be sent for a week-long training session on sales. Now, here we go again. Unfortunately, in this case, she's in a lecture-based style classroom. None of this content is going to be tailored. Most of it she already knows, and so she immediately shuts down when she's sort of referred to content that she's already aware of. So again, it's a big problem. So Gina has now not really learned much from the week, but think about it. She's been out of the office for a full week. So now all of the prospecting that she should have been doing while she was on the job, not been getting done. And so, yes, she's got problems. So basically, by week 14, Gina is saying, "Sky, not me." So she's decided that she is out of here. She has tendered her resignation. She's leaving SkyNot, and her boss, Andrea, she kind of stacks this up to, this is a bad hire. I think we've all kind of faced this as managers. We've kind of said, you know what, we've lost that employee. They weren't performing. You could see the numbers in the CRM. She wasn't doing a good job. So, oh well, you know, that was a bad hire. We're just going to have to go out and find another one. So let me go back out and do another search. So that's what she's up against. So a little sanity check on this. Stats according to, and again, this is a Forbes article. I've got the citation down there. This is actually a stat that I've heard is covered across many people. The ranges change, but usually the cost of replacing an employee is anywhere between $3,000 and $18,000. That's going to depend on the employee. Did you use a search to do that? Did you use someone who was a placement agency, which that can be extremely expensive? So not only did we lose Gina, who actually had experience, but now we have to replace Gina, so we're going to have to be paying this cost. The other issue we have is unwanted turnover effects of performance. All of those leads that were assigned to Gina have not been followed up on for 14 weeks, and now they're going to have to be assigned to someone else, and that's a problem. So obviously you can see how that's affecting performance. And I don't know about you, but I think most of our organizations are running so thin and so short-staffed that it's difficult when we have to replace an employee, because what's going to happen is it's going to affect the other employees. So now the other people on the sales team need to pick up the slack for Gina. So now you could be driving other employees away. And I think there's also sort of like a psychological message that's sent. When someone like Gina leaves the company, other people look around and say, wow, maybe Sky and Not is not exactly what I thought it was. So there's a real risk. So again, these are some of the implications that can come and the consequences from a bad, onboarding situation. So I'm going to pause right there because we've kind of walked through a lot of sort of time over the course of Gina. I'm just going to ask if anyone has any questions before we continue on. So we'll just put the word out. So, and I think the process that we just walked through as well, it kind of looks at Gina, who's an account executive, but I think this applies to a lot of different roles within organizations. We're still doing the same things. We need to onboard employees that are difficult to replace. So let's do this. Before we continue on, what I want to do is a redo. I want to basically kind of take a step back in time, and let's do a redo on Gina. And what we're going to do now is I just want to look at an alternate reality. Let's take a look at what happens to Gina in this new world, future of learning that, again, is happening right now. So let's take a look at this. So when we look at Gina, she's just joined Skynot, and she's an account exec. She's excited. Again, this is day one. She's working for a great company. She has the same amount of experience that she had before. So in this alternate reality, what we're going to do for onboarding is introduce this concept, and I'm going to be illustrating this with Expedition, which is a product that Digitech Interactive has come up with that's driven off of our learning management platform. But this could apply to anything. And again, these sort of principles can maybe be executed through your learning management platform or in other ways, and we'll provide that. I think one of the most important things to mention about this is that you'll notice that on day one, week one, instead of Gina being assigned 34 courses of onboarding, she's actually assigned a journey. So she is actually assigned to a very targeted, very tailored learning journey that's set up for her specific role. And you'll notice in this case, it's broken up into chunks. So for the first waypoint check-in, she's only meeting stage one. So for stage one, she's got to do these three things. So an elevator pitch. So these are also based on competencies. So we're really big believers. And I'm wondering, I don't know if anyone on chat maybe can chime in if any of you are actually using competency-based learning or any competencies there. I'd be really interested to find out. I really feel like competency-based learning is such a game changer, really, and we're excited about being able to apply it. But in this case, we know exactly what skills, based on the competencies, that an account manager needs to have. So the very first skills that an account manager will need to demonstrate in the first 10, 15 days of being on the job is to be able to give an elevator pitch. So again, her first stage of learning, which is only 3 courses, is set up this way. So she's got to demonstrate those. So these are modules that she will take. One other thing to mention is that in this, she's also assigned a mentor immediately. Is there anyone out there who's using mentors? I think mentorships are becoming way more popular, and I think they're part of what will be a major game changer, and we're going to really need to start to leverage more mentoring. And I think in a lot of corporate organizations, they're already using some mentorships. So I think that's a good trend that seems to be happening. So again, on day one, week one, when Gina is added and her learning journey is assigned, she's automatically connected up with her mentor. So in this case, her mentor is her supervisor. It's Dan Schwartz, who's the director of sales for SkyNot. Contact information is right there. I think that's really key. Really allow basically that mentor to be able to connect up with someone right away. So you'll notice also that when Gina is added on in her onboarding, she's also set up with an automatic check-in. So she's got a deadline right off the bat. Her next check-in is going to be, in this case, it's May 16th, but she's going to have to actually be ready for that check-in with Dan. So what's nice is that it's forcing a little bit of making sure that there's a goal, a very set sort of incremental goal that Gina has to be ready to present to. So one of the other things that I think is really important, and again, this is just demonstrated through the Expedition platform, but this can certainly be done in most organizations with a variety of other ways. So something to think about is when your employee starts for the first day, how can you basically assign a mentor? Mentors are really good. In fact, there's a 2013 study that was done by Sun Microsystems on mentors and mentee programs. And what they found was for both of those audiences, mentors and mentees, it actually really increased engagement and really increased retention. Because I think what you're doing for a mentor is that you're offering them an opportunity to be an expert, you know, to kind of be a go-to. So it automatically sets it up. And, you know, it also offloads some of the work of supervising every individual onboarding employee to someone in your organization. So it's really, really important to set up mentors. And I think a lot of you may be doing this, but it's nice to have a mentor who might also be someone who's on that person's team. We talked again about the Gallup poll that talked about engagement. One thing that they mentioned about engagement, employee engagement, you can significantly increase engagement and employee retention if the employee has friends on the jobs. So it's very, very important, I think, on day one that someone is assigned to that new hire. So for Gina, she has a go-to, Dan Schwartz. And Dan might find other mentors who are more peer-based mentors. But think about how you can assign that to your new hires. So the other thing is that often mentors, in this case Dan, what I'm hearing, and I don't know if you guys are facing this too, but often with organizations with Gen X and Gen Y coming up, that managers aren't necessarily great at coaching and providing direction and skills. And so what we've actually executed in this particular platform as well are rubrics. So I think one of the benefits of rubrics is, one, Gina has access to this rubric right from day one as well. So she knows very clearly, you know, what she's going to be evaluated on. What's great for her is that when she takes the instruction and the e-learning and the onboarding, she knows what she needs to focus on. Hey, oh, they're talking about presenting a clear and compelling definition of what the company does. I've got to focus on this because I've got to be ready to present that. So it gives you a goal and an outcome that you need to hit. The other benefit is that it allows inexperienced mentors or inexperienced managers an easier way to provide coaching and feedback. So in this case, during the check-in, the mentor has Gina give me your elevator pitch on SkyNot. And then during that, the mentor can be evaluating. Oh, that's about a 10, that's about a 7, that's about a 5. So basically giving feedback along the way. It gives both the mentee and the mentor or the manager a really nice quasi-objective way to be able to give feedback. And again, it helps a lot. Now, beneficially, what will happen is that when you do this, you're also going to be allowed to look at these. And if, for example, in the expedition, you know, basically Gina didn't do so well in one particular aspect, then basically the prescriptive learning can be assigned to her based on the rubric scoring. So a manager doesn't have to remember, oh, it looks like Gina was not doing great on bonding and rapport. You know, so I got to remember to really give her some kind of resources on how she can do better at bonding and rapport. But instead, the rubric automatically looks at thresholds and says, oop, you know, Gina was below this on bonding and rapport, so we're going to go ahead and automatically assign that to her in her journey. So again, it's a nice automated way to provide some prescriptive learning. And again, this can certainly be done outside of a platform like Expedition, just by applying small micro-learning modules that are very, very based on competencies. So again, in this case, demonstrate bonding and rapport. Very short module, very specific, provides a lot of instruction, and that would allow you to be able to easily assign to somebody very targeted, very prescriptive learning. The other thing that I think is really important is, you know, we found that when Gina was onboarded originally, she had to sit through all of that onboarding all at once in the first week. But again, by providing this kind of prescriptive learning along the way, and if it's mobile responsive, so Gina can now access this anywhere, anytime. So we just recently redesigned Knowledge Direct from the ground up to be mobile first, making sure that learners have access. And I think this is really something that as a learning community, we should have been doing a long time ago, is really allowing learners to access instruction in the flow of their work, not requiring them to go off to some kind of an LMS somewhere and find the answers themselves, but really using some logic to drive the content to them instead. So I think that's very, very important to allow them to be able. So when you're creating your training, I would strongly urge you, if you're not going to provide prescriptive modules that are mobile responsive, think about providing some job aids and some checklists. You can make these in PDF files, you know, and allow them to be accessed through mobile devices, because that's how everyone's learning today. So basically, if you're not going to do it, again, something that would allow it to be prescriptive, but also to be sort of, you know, allowing them to be, to allow them to use that as a learning tool as they're going through and accessing it anytime. So again, very important. And again, also try to keep the e-learning that you create very, very short and very, very prescriptive. So it's built to meet a specific competency. The benefit of that is, as artificial intelligence and as big data is used more and more, we'll be able to automatically serve up these modules based on specific situations or algorithms, so that it takes a lot of the stress of having to manually assign these things off. But to set that up, we need to have modules that are very, very competency-based. So another thing, at week 8, now Gina's feeling very good. She's feeling confident. But remember, some of the onboarding, and I know this still happens today, if we build these modules, even as microlearning, you know, sometimes we don't get back to update them right away. So you can get outdated content. So one thing that we use here at Digitech is we use Clarizen. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Clarizen, but there are lots of other tools out there that would allow you to do some social learning. So social learning can allow best practices. So again, on day 1, when Gina is joined up, she should be assigned to a team. In this case, we've got our sales team discussions. You can also do this through discussion forums. And again, there's platforms like Jam. There's a lot of other platforms that will allow you to do that. But what's beneficial is if you can provide in the team, and as a leader, you should be helping to really encourage the use of these social sites to help people, you know, in this case, the sales team can share ideas on, you know, what's the latest on product updates. Oh, what are some tips that really help overcome that? Oh, and by the way, that 83% stat, don't pay attention to that. That is absolutely not correct. So really a great way to get information out. And I think a lot of you probably know, you know, there's the 70-20-10 rule, and I think probably a lot of you are familiar with that. 70% we learn by doing, 20% we learn from each other, 10% we learn formally. So if you look at that 20%, we learn from each other. So I know a lot of us now are working remotely, we're on virtual teams, we may never meet face to face, but make sure you maintain that social aspect and that culture by creating a really dynamic social learning environment where people can learn from one another. there's some really great ways too. You can have gamification where people who post or respond to discussions, you could create leaderboards and points. I mean, I know that's what we do in Knowledge Direct, but that's a great way to encourage it as well. But I think honestly, if you lead with a culture of sharing and fun, that it'll encourage people to really communicate through these social sites. So let's take a look at Gina. So week 8, she's coming up with her very first demo again. So what's going to happen? Boom, it's a miss. So again, you know, we can do all the training we want to, but in some cases, you know, people are going to find out that, you know, they're going to go into a demo and they're not going to do a great job. And in this case, Gina didn't succeed. So what do we do? Well, instead of the answer being more training, the answer should be more practice. So in this case, just as an example, one thing that Salesforce, and some of you may use Salesforce, Salesforce has an incredible API that allows you to be able to look at the data. So for Gina, Salesforce, outside of you having to be responsible, can look at Gina's performance. Notice that in her sales funnel, she's not really moving a lot of people past the demo stage into a proposal. That would indicate that she needs to be shot more simulations to help her practice her demo and her overcoming objections. So again, while you can do this in some of these tools, like again, for Salesforce, you can integrate directly. Even if you don't have a direct integration, what I would recommend you do is start looking at how can I create SCOs or shareable content objects or learning activities that are only practice. They're only simulation. They're not trying to do a lot of training. They're not trying to do a lot of product training. I think we see this often is what happens is every time that we develop new training, the content is then duplicated and duplicated and duplicated. And what happens is if that content changes, now you have to be responsible for maintaining that. So what I would recommend you do is build some modules that are straight simulation practice. In this case, we do an awful lot of sales training. So there's an awful lot of sales simulations that allow Gina to practice more on her bonding rapport and on her overcoming objections. So, you know, in fact, there's been studies that show that when you simulate a situation, the brain actually uses that almost as if it were reality. I mean, you can't really tell the difference between reality and between what is being simulated. So it's an extremely effective way to be able to you know, practice and do it. So let's take a look at week 14. So, whereas before week 14, we lost Gina, she was gone. Now, by using this approach, Gina's demonstrated that her previous experience has been really well served. She's actually definitely suitable to become a senior account executive. And so, you know, her manager notices that. And in fact, by doing a competency-based approach to learning, the learning management platform can tell that Gina, wow, she's doing really well on some of these other things. She's doing really well at account development. She's doing really well at prospecting. So, you know, we might want to move her into a new position. So again, instead of losing Gina, as we did earlier through the onboarding situation, we've actually offered a lot more opportunity to her, and we've found the fit that she has. So Gina is now being asked to move up in Skyna. So that's the alternate reality that is demonstrated through what we call the future of learning, but actually is a future that we can achieve right now. Yeah, she's rocking it. Mm-hmm. So to recap a little bit on the future of learning, you want to avoid too much upfront training, and I know some of you have mentioned that. So I think right off the bat, what I would recommend is if you could take a look at the onboard training that you provide, and then take a look at the actual outcomes that you expect of a new hire at week 1, at week 3, at week 6, at week 9, and then time space. So take some of that content out. What do they need to know right away? and only provide what they need to know when they need to know it, okay? And then you can move on. Again, we use waypoints as a sort of a way to organize the content. There are other ways to do it, but try to avoid that excessive amount of content up front. Again, Ebbinghaus is going to tell you, they're going to forget most of that. But by bursting your information or providing recurring time space, you can basically refresh that content and keep their memory straight. The other thing is design to specific competencies. This is really key, I think, is if we can start going back in and saying, we're going to build a sales course, why don't you instead say, we're going to build a skill, we're going to build a shareable content object, we're going to build a little module on practicing bonding and rapport. Now we're going to build another one on closing skills. Now we're going to build another one on, if you're doing customer service, you've got some new hires, customer service. Maybe now what we're going to do is we're going to do a session on simulating how do I resolve customer issues or unhappy customers. So again, if you identify by specific competencies, you can basically have resources that are a lot more flexible. And the other benefit is if they're small and they're not redundant, when content changes, as we all know it's changing all the time, it won't affect as many of your changes. So your lifecycle costs will go down as well. So finally, map those behaviors back to training. You want to identify what does Gina, your Gina, need to be able to demonstrate at this waypoint? What does that person need to be able to do? I know a lot of you are probably familiar with the concept of scaffolding. So if you go from simple to more and more complex, well, let's not get Gina involved in negotiating huge contracts on day one. She's not going to be doing that then. What does she really need to be able to do? So map those behaviors back to, again, competency-based learning, some kind of modules that help it to be a lot more flexible. And again, that'll also help when your new hires become your next promoted employees. You can apply those basic competencies against the new role, and you can easily do differences training. Finally, mentor. Definitely, again, we talked about the fact that the retention is greatly increased when you provide a mentor. Just sometimes we call it here, Digitech, we'll say, here's your DigiBuddy, here's your Digitech buddy. So you'll have a buddy who you report to, and we make sure that someone is assigned a buddy right off the bat. Now, is that a mentor necessarily? No, not necessarily, but someone who they can connect with, who, again, it'll increase engagement if someone has a sort of a friendly or an emotional connection with someone at work. So it's really important. And I think, even with Gen X's and Gen Y's, it's even more important. They're very much interested in connection. And finally, encourage social learning. Definitely, like we talked about with the connections. I think there's easy ways. There's so many tools out there that will allow it. And don't put this all on yourself. Don't feel like you as a leader need to populate all of these discussion forums. Really encourage your employees to contribute. Maybe even set it up as a check base and say, hey, did you participate or did you commit? I mean, look at Facebook. People like posting. So let people post, and let people post fun stuff too. That'll drive people to go there and again, learn about that 83% statistic. So really encourage that. So that's a recap. We just wanted to stop and ask if anyone had any questions. We do have, by the way, Bridging the Gap, a white paper